Good afternoon, everybody, and we're going to get started right away. Welcome to the third installment of what's become the hugely popular Alta Pro Cybersecurity webinar series. Today's webinar is entitled Putting Cybersecurity to Work in Your Practice, and we're going to be discussing the practical ways that that you can protect your firm from the growing threat of cyber attacks and cyber risk. We're proud to once again feature as our guest speaker, Kevin O'Hagan, founder of O'Hagan Meyer Attorneys and co-founder of Safe Law, a cyber risk program designed solely to protect law firms from cyber risks. Kevin's recognized as one of the industry's leading voices in the area of cybersecurity law, so we're really, really happy and lucky to have him. And hosting today's session is someone many of you are already familiar with, and that is Jay Reeves, who's the Alta Pro Risk Pro. And I just got to do a sidebar and say, Jay's more than just a pretty interviewer face. He's also an expert in risk management himself, the ex-VP of North Carolina Mutual, and is an author of a new book, The Most Powerful Attorney in the World, which is available on Amazon. We're actually going to give away 10 books, so stand by for the details there. Alrighty, before we get started, let's do the blocking and tackling here. So we have to go over the rules of engagement. First and foremost, if you want to download the transcript of the webinar, you can do that here. You're going to be receiving something in your chat windows about how to do exactly that. This webinar has been approved for 1 hour of ethics CLE, excuse me. But to get that, and if you've been on the webinars in the past, you have to do the survey at the end to receive your credit. In addition to that, there's going to be 2 codes that we're going to be giving during the webinar just to make sure you're still paying attention. And you'll need to remember those words. We're going to throw one at you right now, the first word. You got to enter those in the survey to get the credit. If you're participating via phone, just email us at info@altaprorpg.com to get a form to fill out, and we'll get you the CLE credit. We want you to direct your questions to the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. At the end of the webinar, the last 10 minutes or so, we're going to try to get to as many of these as we can. And if we can't get to all of them, we're going to create a PDF document at the end that will address all the questions we get, and we'll distribute that to all the attendees. All right, so that's it. Let me go ahead and turn this thing over to Jay. And oh, hang on a second before we do that. Here's that information about the book that is going to be available to the first 10 users, or 10 responders, free. Of course, you can go buy it too if you'd like. Anyway, so here you go. Jay, why don't you go ahead and take it from here?
Thank you so much, Todd. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Alta Pro Live. As Todd says, this is Chapter 3 of our cybersecurity series of webinars that bring you some of the nation's top experts sharing insider tips on how you can keep your law practice safe and successful. My name is Jay Reeves, but I'm better known as the Risk Pro for Alta Pro. This guy here is the on-call risk management consultant for all lawyers who have insurance through Alta Pro. If you've got a question on anything from getting rid of your case files to getting rid of a client, just throw open your window and ask for the Risk Pro, and I'll come flying in and try my best to help. And it's absolutely free as a service of Alta Pro. As Todd said, this is an interactive program. We want you to be involved. We're going to introduce you to 3 steps you can take to put cybersecurity to work in your law practice. Step 1 is to practice cyber risk management. And you'll learn that a key component of that is having the right insurance coverages in place. Spoiler alert, simply having malpractice coverage is probably not going to get it. Step number 2 is keeping your data and systems safe. You'll learn that a key to that is having a data privacy and protection policy, and you'll learn some pointers in developing a policy for your office. And step 3 is knowing what to do if something goes wrong. You have a cyber attack, a hack, or just a cyber incident, and the key to that is having an incident response plan. So those are the 3 steps we're going to cover. We want this program to be interactive, so let's kick it off by asking you a question, our listeners. What would you say is the level of cybersecurity in your law firm right now? You have a range from terrible to great. And as we're waiting for the responses to come in, I'm going to bring in our expert, Kevin O'Hagan. Kevin, you were with us for chapter 1 of this cybersecurity series back in March of 2020, 6 months ago, but it seems like a lifetime ago, doesn't it? So much has changed. Yeah,
it sure does.
The world is upside down, and lawyers, as much as anyone, are feeling the pressure and the stress of the economy, the health, running a law practice in these uncertain times. I'm sure you're seeing that on the ground with the lawyers you're working with.
Oh, absolutely. It's very, very difficult. I mean, you think about it. We've all in the legal industry, and I'm sure all the guests here today can understand this. When it first hit, we all were scrambling to figure out how do we continue to operate and generate revenue, for our firms and our families. And it first led to a first phone call, right to your IT person, making sure that you have remote desktop or VPNs, that everybody can work from home, that everybody has the equipment they need. And so if our practice, as many of us rue this, has gone more and more electronic over the years, and everything seems to end up in your email box, COVID has just made it just that much more so.
Well taken. We see the results here, and I would say this is an encouraging sign. We asked the same question 6 months ago and got about the same number of responses. Most are saying their cybersecurity is okay or even good, and our objective, and that was pretty much the same results from 6 months ago. Only a couple, 1%, say it's terrible. So our goal today is to move everybody up into the good to great category with that regard. On the subject of cyber risk management, Kevin, it strikes me as a lawyer that risk management when it comes to cybersecurity isn't just a good idea to avoid a bar complaint or a malpractice claim. It's an ethical requirement. Rule 1.1 of competence says we have to be technologically competent. Rule 1.6 says you have to keep everything safe and confidential. So cybersecurity is not just a fun topic to talk about. It's part of our professional duties as lawyers.
Well, sure. And for all the lawyers out there, this is your ethical component. And why we're getting that 1 hour of ethics that's so hard to get sometimes is, the truth of it is that you'll not see anything in the rules, right, that obviously state that you need to have a firewall, or that you need to have a policies and procedures to prevent ransomware, or fraudulent fund transfers, or dual authentication, double authentication of your email servers. None of that's going to be in the rules. The rules just basically say that you need to protect your client's materials to the standard of care that's currently in place. And that standard of care has risen over the years from I have a password protected, which could be akin to just having a lock on your door, right? The ethical rules we all know includes you got to be able to lock your office at night, not let somebody just wander in and look at clients' files. Same thing. That's how you have to look at your electronic files. And now more so than ever, because we're almost entirely electronic now. There's very little paper out there being shuffled about. I used to get stacks of mail when I first started at Lord Bissell, or now Lock Lord, many years ago. And I don't get those anymore. None of us do. So it's a different thing. And you just have to shift your attention because of the ethical rules to your cybersecurity. And that's why it's so important, is because the entire practice is now, to my point about COVID, is electronic. And right now that has to be front and center. So if you spend any time, again, making sure that things were secured, at your office, you need to make sure they're secure in the cyber world, electronic data storage.
On the subject of the COVID risk, I've got some numbers which sort of speak for themselves. Cybercrime skyrocketing since February. The FBI reports daily cyber incidents tripled from February to April, from 1,000 a day to 3,000 a day. 1.8 billion cyber incidents reported to the National Cybersecurity Center, and the numbers go on and on. But again, more than the numbers, it's simply part of our duty as good lawyers and good ethical lawyers. And there is one ABA opinion, Kevin, I would like to share with our audience, Formal Opinion 477 from the American Bar Association, not binding on the states as precedent, but it's certainly good authority. It says a lawyer may be required to take special precautions to protect against disclosure when, 1, required by an agreement with the client, 2, required by law, or 3, when the nature of the information alone requires a higher degree of security. And then it has some criteria to evaluate whether information should be subject to this special care. And one is the need to conduct due diligence on vendors who provide tech services for your company. So that's kind of a new thing right there. We sort of have to vet the companies that we're affiliated with and providing services for. And that's, again, according to the ABA, part of our ethical duty.
Yeah, it's really a flipping of the switch for people because so for years, let's face it, everybody in a law firm practice thought that the security and the IT issues were for the IT guy. You know, just IT guy set me up. And you don't really ask any questions. You didn't say, well, you know, how often are we going to change the passwords? You never really thought about integrating good IT hygiene into the practice and into your lawyers and most importantly, your staff. And that is the big flip of the switch that needs to happen. And as you pointed out, the FBI talking about increased cyber attacks, it has gone through the roof since COVID. I don't know if just folks the cyber hackers have had more time, the criminals have had more time to sit around and do this, but we're seeing a big uptick in cases and matters and claims because our firm handles all the intake and triage and handling of claims in the first instance for Safe Law and a bunch of other programs out there that handle lawyers' cyber liability insurance. So we're seeing that on the lawyers. And another thing lawyers have to make the flip of the switch is, I remember thinking, well, who would want to hack into my system and for what reason, right? I mean, what are they going to get? We're sometimes a litigation firm. I mean, what are they possibly going to get from us? Well, what the attackers are doing right now, and the focus needs to be for you and why this is such a big risk, is that it is not about cyber vandalism, right? It's not about somebody getting in and, you know, some, you know, 14-year-old in their pajamas hacking into your system and messing around with your files or whatnot. It's not that. It's about cyber crimes, cyber criminals who are incredibly sophisticated right now. And the two number one claims we're seeing, and I know we talked about this perhaps if you attended in the past, and it's continued through COVID, is ransomware, and then social engineering, which is followed by fraudulent fund transfer or some way of taking money from you. Think about it. If you're a cyber criminal, it has to monetize. The hack has to monetize to something. And there's really two ways that we're seeing that have grown substantially in the last year or two. And that is with the ransomware where they can shut you down, lock up all your files, and you have to pay the ransom or get your backup going, or both. Many, many times we do both. You know, 5 years ago, I didn't have a Bitcoin account, and we do now because you have to pay these criminals in Bitcoin to get your key and your code to unlock your files. The other one that's a big deal is the social engineering, and that's much more of a human error. Both of them are human errors. It's much less about nowadays the actual technology, because most of you, I'm going to guess, and especially all the people that said your cybersecurity is okay, you probably clicked okay because you talk to your IT person, you have firewalls, you have passwords, you might even regularly change them. Some of you might even have double authentication for, say, your Microsoft Exchange or whatever email server you use. And what I mean by double authentication means when every once in a while you do put your password in, but then it phones you on your cell phone or some other secure number and asks you to authenticate the login, right? Some of you might even have that. I can tell you that if you don't have that, then you probably shouldn't have clicked OK. We can get into that too, Jay, as we walk through this, and why some of these things, why it's become lately so much more of a human error issue than it is about your actual systems.
Well, to your point, Kevin, ransomware here in North Carolina, our state bar was locked down with a ransomware attack earlier this year for a couple of days. Luckily, there was apparently no harm, no foul. To your point about human error, on our State Bar website right now is an alert for a scam that's being perpetrated by old-fashioned fax machine. Apparently, a scammer is sending a fax purportedly from a Canadian law firm soliciting a lawyer in North Carolina to help collect insurance proceeds of millions of dollars, insurance proceeds in North Carolina. And the fax has an email address, and it says, to learn more, if you're interested in joining me, this firm, which is actually a legitimate firm, if you Google search it, what they want you to do is send the email. And once you've sent the email, you're in. So again, human error. And apparently a couple of lawyers were alerted to this. They got the fax and they reported it. So your points are right on. Before we move to protect your data, you mentioned SafeLaw as a cyber insurance product. Let's talk a little bit, because to me, a cornerstone of risk management, and this isn't a sales webinar, it's an ethics webinar, but a cornerstone of risk management is having proper insurance coverage. So if I'm a solo lawyer, Kevin, I've got professional liability insurance. I've never had a claim. I'm a good lawyer. Am I covered? Do I need anything else? Do I need to worry about anything else?
It's funny you ask that question, because about 15 years ago, I think I was at a ball game. I think I was watching I think the Yankees play the Cubs, and I was sitting there with my insurance broker, and I started talking about cyber liability because I had started to practice in this area and do things. And I said, am I covered under my professional liability insurance if I have ransomware, if I have social engineering occur, if I get hacked into and client files are stolen? And his immediate answer was, well, of course. And then he thought about it, and then he started texting with his assistants back at the office, and it kept sliding. the response kept sliding downward, which was, yes, I have coverage. And then it was, not sure. And then it was, probably not. And then ultimately it ended up with, well, we're really not sure. Well, in the last 15 years, we have become much more sure. The carriers, particularly the professional liability carriers, so your E&O carrier for your LPL, will exclude that. So anything relating to your electronic data systems or breaches, generally speaking, will have an exclusion on that. They didn't have those many years ago, and so we would try on coverage side to try to categorize a hack or a breach as a form of malpractice, right? A negligence issue, almost as if, so I left a laptop at Starbucks and somebody gets into it and looks at my client files. Is that malpractice or is that a data breach? As time has progressed on the coverage side, it's become much more clearer that those kinds of breaches, whether it's a direct attack, ransomware, somebody gets in, whatever the case might be, do not fall within your professional liability practice. Now, also, something that was never covered by anybody, which needs to be talked about, is until the last several years, is really the cybercrime. Attorneys are being targeted for this every day. We see a new claim every day. And it can be anything from somebody sending an email purporting to be you, say the managing partner of the firm or a principal, to a subordinate or a staff member asking to send some gift cards and the codes from them because they're with a client and they need this, or any number of other scams. Okay, false vendors that need to get paid. They can hack into a particular transaction if you do real estate. That's happened a lot. And change the wire instructions on an email, a spoofed email. That was something that was never covered because it involved crime, fraud, and that sort of thing. Cyber policies has developed to actually cover those kinds of losses. Every policy is a little different, so you got to really look at them. And sometimes you can buy endorsements that expand the coverage. So I encourage you, as part of your risk management, and maybe even as part of your ethical duties, to look into that issue and have a good discussion with your broker or somebody like at Alta Pro or whatnot about what coverages there really are for cyber. Because like I said, if you're just going to rely on the professional liability, you're probably not going to get covered for something like this. And these losses can be big. I mean, if you all of a sudden And let's say you're a 10 lawyer law firm out there and you take a $250,000 hit. That can be pretty painful that year, especially if it's not covered. And we've seen many of those. Sometimes we get the money back. It's been wired off on a transaction to a new account because somebody was fraudulently induced or socially engineered into doing it. And sometimes we get the money back, but very often we can't get it back. And if it's not covered, then you're going to have to pay that, or you're going to be lost, and you're going to have to pay your client. You could also then get sued by your client for having wired off the money in the wrong way, and now you got a defense cost for that as well if you want to try to defend it.
Right.
I mean, these are so many different ways. And so your original question, Jay, I'm sorry we kind of went on, but relates to coverage. You cannot rely on the fact that you have professional liability insurance to cover many of the types of claims that we're going to talk about today.
Right. So they go together. And what I heard from you is be a smart consumer and know, do your due diligence. Back when I was in-house with an insurance company, a lawyer's malpractice company, not all that long ago, we didn't talk about cyber. So this is a fairly new thing. So be a smart consumer. And Kevin, I've got some data from the ABA Legal Technology Report 2019. 33% of responding lawyers or firms had cyber liability insurance. I think that was double from a year or two prior. So this is something that lawyers are picking up. It's a good idea to have this. California has introduced a bill that requires certain businesses, not just law firms, and I'm not sure how law firms are covered, that requires some sort of cyber coverage for certain.
Yeah, I mean, we may be heading that direction with the bar associations.
Exactly.
It hasn't happened yet, but we certainly might head in that direction. But that really shouldn't be the impetus. It's mainly you got to overcome that hesitancy on protecting yourself, not on both policies and procedures, on the technology side, and then also as a fallback, potentially insurance. You have to look at those things differently. To look at it and say, as I did for many years prior to being involved with cyber claims, was that who would want to hack into me? Well, I'm not Disney. I'm not Target. They don't need credit card numbers. They're not after credit card numbers anymore. That's not it. They're not after personal identifiable information yet. Still, they're not into that right now. They're into monetizing. So that means ransomware. That means socially engineering. That means getting you to your staff to wire money off or to do things of that. That's what we're seeing the most of. And so it's really moved. And so if you think, well, I don't really have anything that people want. You do. You have money, and they can try to come get it. They also can lock up your systems, like I said, right. Through ransomware, and then you're going to probably have to pay the ransom if you don't have a very, very good backup.
And talk about sensitive data. I mean, it doesn't get any more confidential and sensitive than in a law firm. You're dealing with your clients and your own social security numbers and birth dates and financial information. On the Alta Pro blog post, we have published a couple of recent blogs. One of the stars of the TV show Shark Tank fell victim to a ransomware attack. They got their money back, I think. It sort of amazingly got the money back. But again, they followed an erroneous email and wired money that shouldn't have been wired. So it's out there, it's happening. And I thought, let's ask our audience. We've talked a little bit about cyber insurance. Let's ask the audience, do you have a cyber liability insurance policy? We've already sort of tipped the hand that 33% said yes, according to the American Bar Association. Also on the ransomware, we did a blog post, Kevin. They're after information, they're after money is what they're after, but information can be leveraged to money. We did a post on a law firm that represents Lady Gaga, Madonna, Bruce Springsteen. They were hacked, submit private information, including contracts with these clients. Some of it was published on the web with a ransomware demand, or it'll all go public. I don't know what happened with that case, but can you imagine anything worse than if you're a lawyer and you wake up and you read, and it was published in the Times, it was a story in the New York Times about information on Lady Gaga's performance contracts are available on the dark web. Can you imagine anything worse if you're an attorney who has that information and your system has been hacked and has been the source of that?
No, we've seen many claims like that. It's not the most numerous claim, but when it happens, it's sort of a hurricane event. It's a big problem because now you've got it on multiple levels. First, you have to identify where the hack came in. You have to stop it. And you're going to need help with all those things, right? And that's the first level. Then you have to figure out what the damage is. And that can be very difficult to figure out. They may say they only have, like you said, Lady Gaga's information, or maybe even if you, a local contractor information or somebody that you represent, or maybe if you do criminal work, a local high profile person who's been accused of a crime, and they could release your attorney files to the public. Particularly if you have anything that's notorious and that is in the newspapers at all, there might be a hacker that wants to get involved with that and ransom you for that information. And first they'll tell you about it. First you got to find it, the breach. You got to stop the breach, identify what has been taken. Now what they tell you they took might be just a subset of what they have. So the forensics needed to determine that. And I believe you would have an ethical duty once you've known of a breach to actually do a full search to make sure of what's been compromised. Then you have notification issues, right? You have to notify your clients. And that is much more of a reputational risk for a law firm than it is the actual practical cost of sending a letter to everyone. Imagine your clients. We've had to do this multiple times, sending a letter or an email to all your clients saying, hey, my electronic systems were hacked and your information may be out there. That can destroy a business fairly quickly, as you've seen out in the public with several of these. And the big companies, they have towers of insurance. They have $100, $200 million of insurance. They can withstand this kind of thing. These kind of policies are designed in the lawyer's realm to cover you for the risk that you're really going to see, and that's to cover all these costs of having to fix this problem and identify what it is, potentially notifying your clients. There's no doubt that if you have been hacked or somebody's been inside your system, that many privacy attorneys will tell you to contact those clients you think most likely their information was compromised. And again, like I said, it leads to that reputational issue that can be the greatest damage, aside from just the basic costs of dealing with it. That can cost you money going forward for quite some time.
Well, here we have the results of the poll, and 32% of our participants say they do have a cyber liability policy in effect. 68% no policy. We had one question, I'm not sure if I have a policy or not. So maybe they're not sure.
And I know this is great to talk about the insurance policies, and the policies do provide a lot of upfront pre-breach services that can assist you. The policies have a number you can call right away as soon as it happens, and people jump on it for you. They can get into your systems from the outside on a network with the right access to start helping you fix this. There's many resources that come to bear. I mean, you got to look at these policies almost like a homeowner's policy for your law firm. Homeowners policies cover your whole home, right? And if a tree falls on it, you call the insurance company, they help you get your tree off your house. Same here. And that's the kind of the idea. And you have first party, like you do on the homeowners, where it's just your damages. You also have third party coverage, which is, somebody, let's say in a homeowner's policy, somebody comes and slips on your doorstep. You have coverage for that to defend you. Same here as it relates to clients or third parties that might bring an action if you've been hacked or been a subject of some kind of electronic fraud. Now, that's all well and good. And you can get that insurance, that's great. And many of you don't have it. But part of this was to talk also about what you can do short of insurance to help yourself. And I don't know if we're going to talk about that now, Jay, or we're going to be talking about it later.
I think now's the time. We're in step 2, and step 3 is what to do when incident response. But let's talk about let's go back to step 2. We're still on protection. So when we talk about a data protection policy, that's not an insurance policy. We're talking about a set of procedures and systems in your office to keep your data safe. And I'm going to start by suggesting one, then I'm going to pitch to the expert. One would be to have a staff meeting. Bring your staff in, order pizza, talk about this stuff. It amazed me back when I used to do insurance audits I would go to law firms, it amazed me how the lawyer knew all the information, knew all the rules and the regulations, but didn't share it as much with the staff. So have a staff meeting. Talk about what are our vulnerabilities here in the office? What are our strong points? Who should be in charge of making sure, who's taking laptops out of the office, especially in, with remote work and such. So have a staff meeting and talk about how private and confidential our data is.
Right, and we through Alta Pro and other programs, we can give you an outline of what to talk about. I can tell you now what I would talk about and do regularly with staff and lawyers. I think you raise the issue, again, to prevent human error. Well, let's back it up a step. First, what I would suggest is if you haven't had a meaningful discussion with your IT professional or the provider of your IT about security, you need to do that. That's absolutely important. Somebody should be tasked in your law firm with just, and even if it's just yourself, talking to the person about what kind of security you do have, where you're keeping your files, how you're keeping those. Do you have a firewall? Do you not? What kind of antivirus protection do you have, if any? What backup do you have, right? Check to ask the IT professional, do you have a backup? How is it kept? I've had ransomware attacks where they get into the main server and we assume the backup will be fine, but the backup was so closely linked to the main server that it leaks over. And now you got everything encrypted. So you have to pay the ransom. Now, the good news is honor amongst thieves, believe it or not, and pretty much as soon as we pay the ransom, we usually get the key. But that's one example. So having that meaningful discussion with your IT professional, and then also ask them, what insurance do they have if they make a mistake? You may find out that you've signed a contract with them that says they're not responsible for anything. So check those as well. If you have an IT contract, most of the lawyers on the IT side are going to have them say they're not responsible for an attack if it occurs. So you really can't look at them usually to pony up. And many of the IT providers are so small, they may not have insurance, they might not have that issue, but having a meaningful discussion with them. And then you move to other ways of curing human error and getting away from the systems, right? The systems approach for the IT is that staff meeting. And Jay, you're 100% correct. And there's a couple of topics I would definitely cover. First, if you're the leader of the firm or one of the leaders, you should notify them that if you get an email from me that looks at all strange, asking you for money, asking you to do something I've never asked you to do before, please pick up the phone and call me. Call my cell phone. Verify everything. It's so critical to have a policy, and not have a policy, but also talk about that policy at a meeting that says, if I'm asking you for money to send to me by email or by text or some other fashion, pick up the phone and make sure that it's true. I can't tell you the number of claims I have where someone in accounts payable, if you have that big of a firm, or just the manager or even the secretary, is asked by on a spoofed email from their boss to send them something. And they do it because they want to be responsive. They want to be helpful. And so they didn't bother to pick up the phone, and all of a sudden that money is gone. Okay, that's critical. The other piece, so having a confirmation, and that goes also verbal confirmation of all wire transfers. So you could be in the middle of a real estate transaction, and if a paralegal or a staff member gets an odd email or an email changing the wire instructions at the last minute, that is an absolute red flag. Okay, that's how it happens. Again, verbal confirmation on the phone. Verbal confirmation is the double authentication you need to protect yourself. And I think you can have the policy and you can stick it in a folder like a lot of employee handbooks are, right? But you have to have this discussion that Jay is talking about. That is so, so important. And usually with firms that do that, we just don't have a lot of problems with. They just don't get a claim because they stop the fraud or they stop the crime right in its tracks. Another thing, again, human error. Having this good meeting that needs to be raised is also a policy on clicking attachments. If a staff member, and it's usually the staff members, that's just how it usually happens, is If a staff member gets an email asking to click an attachment from a source that they have never seen before, they should not be allowed to click on it. We have a policy where if you get a suspicious email, but you think it still might be something you need to click on, you send it to your IT person to have it identified. There's also a service called Mimecast and several other companies like that, and that's Mimecast, that has a service for your email servers that will flag those kinds of emails that might be suspicious, and you have to authenticate them. And that service will actually authenticate them for you as well. They kind of scrub through and look for those things and eliminate it. Go ahead, Jay.
Great. Along with that, good tips. Along with that, I always find, Kevin, that checklists, they seem kind of silly, but checklists can be a lifesaver. And I used to love when I audited a law firm, and perhaps they've been doing, you mentioned real estate, perhaps they've been doing transaction for years and years, but they still rigorously followed a checklist. Everything has to be done in this sequence, and they would usually have accountability. Somebody will have to initial or sign and date when that task was done. Thus, if something comes out of the blue, wait a minute, this is not what the checklist says. The lender, you might want a specific checklist for a specific lender. Here's how this lender always requests the transfer. If it isn't on the checklist or isn't on the guideline, that's a red flag. So you make a call. So something as simple as coming up with checklists and following them, because lawyers, and I'm the worst of all, we tend to get complacent. I've done that a million times, right? So that's when
you get busy and you're just trying to get things done, and so is your staff and paralegals, and that's when things slip through the cracks. And the number one way that obviously the ransomware gets into your systems and causes a big time problem is just people clicking on attachments. Also, one other thing to talk about in this staff meeting, this virtual staff meeting that now will have to happen is at your firm, is talking about not just clicking on attachments, but also anything that people receive in any fashion. Okay, it's not just an attachment. It could also just be a link to a website that needs to be discussed and has to be looked at and confirmed, verbally confirmed. Again, it's a lot of this two-factor authentication, two-step process. Sounds like a pain in the butt, but it really needs to happen on a lot of things. And obviously, you can also have at that staff meeting a discussion of changing your passwords. There should be a policy on changing the passwords from time to time. On passwords, also discussed at this meeting, should be that if someone is asking you for your credentials, okay, if it looks like a Microsoft or an email server request for your credentials, question it, because it might look just dead on. It might look real. We've had many staff members at firms give out their credentials, and we find out that there's been a hacker watching transactions, watching the business of the law firm. They can do things like actually divert emails once they're in. They can create rules so that the boss doesn't see that email. It goes to another email, and then that person, that criminal, is now responding as if they're the boss of the firm to someone, and nobody has any idea. So at that staff meeting, if you're asked for your credentials, please pick up the phone and either call the IT person or whoever's in charge of management and say, do you really need my credentials again? Why? Right? Because that's another way they get in to your system. And if you can prevent them getting in and prevent the human error, you're going to go a long way to protecting yourself.
So all of those are great tips for step 2, keeping your data, your systems safe. What I heard you say, Kevin, and I agree 100%, it's less important that you put it in a fancy looking manual than you have safe, secure procedures and that you follow it. Our manuscript offers several tips that you might want to include in your data protection policies in your office. And then a couple of nights ago, I was preparing for this webinar, and I found a terrific resource, a free website, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. A lot of us know that, NIST. They have a sub page there, secondary page for the Computer Security Resource Center. And just 2 days ago, they published a practice guide. This is not just for lawyers, it's for business. A practice guide called Mobile Device Security, Best Practices. for using mobile devices, corporate owned and personally used. So, and that's just chock full of common sense steps to take when your lawyers are using devices outside of the office, which they're doing now. So the resources are out there. Some of it's in our manuscript. Some of it's available online. Key point, protect your data. Talk to your staff about protecting your data. Talk about the dumb things you can do, like clicking on a phishing email. I was distracted here because we got questions coming in. So in a few minutes, we'll get to the questions, Kevin. But now we've talked a little bit about the cyber risk management. We've talked about protecting your data. So let's say something goes wrong and you have a cyber attack or an incident, and you're not even sure if there's been a problem or if there's been anything lost. What do you do? And the key is to have some sort of plan for responding to that incident, excuse me.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's 100% right. I mean, for the people I work with, their number one plan is to pick up the phone and call our hotline to get advice on what to do next, right? And we staff it 24/7, and that's very helpful to people. But if you don't have that and access to that, then certainly having at least thought about, if not written one, a plan. And discussed with your office manager or whomever, right? Very often that'll get reported up to your office manager or whoever's assisting you, depending on the size of your firm, or gets reported to you. Now, what do you do? The first thing obviously to do is to contact your IT professional that set you up. And that's obviously what the first thing that you'd have to do. The person reporting the incident really that's occurring needs to be logged off immediately from their system. Log off every which way that they can, wherever they're logged in. That's a big issue. We have sometimes that people are logged in, they didn't even know it, on another computer. Having that particular, let's say, email account, that if it's known which one it is, having that shut down and having no access to it other than the administrator is very, very helpful. And then you're going to have to start your investigation. And how are you going to go about that? Who are you going to call? Doing some advanced research on this is very helpful. I mean, if you had a fire there, you know to pick up and call the fire department. Having someone to contact, even if it's just their IT professional, and having a pre-discussion with them. Hey, if I get hacked, what do I do? Do I call you? What are you going to do? If you have ransomware, again, which is the number one thing we're seeing right now, are you going to get your backup up and working? You're going to shut down your current system and try to get your backup going. Again, you got to have some sort of response, and just any advanced thinking about it will assist you greatly. I can't tell you the number of firms that have had virtually no thought to this occurring, and there's days and days of delays in doing anything about it. And having just a forethought and who's going to be involved from your firm, who's going to be involved outside of your firm in this is critical.
My guess is an incident response plan doesn't mean running around the office screaming, "Oh, we're dead. This has happened."
Right.
I would direct any insured with Alta Pro, go to our website. Go to the Alta Pro RPG website. We have a pro practice playbook there that offers lots of tips and checklists. There's also a Reminger defense lawyer hotline that you can call if you think something has gone wrong. Maybe even if you're not sure, call the hotline. You might be able to prevent a claim before it arises. So Alta Pro insureds, as probably most LPL insureds, they've got a resource with their carrier. Resources like Kevin, who are response people, an IT expert, even before you have an incident. I saw there's one in North Carolina advertising, I think $300. They'll come in and do a penetration test. They'll and this is specifically sort of for solo small firms, $300, $350. They will kind of do a general tune-up of your security system. So there are things you can do in advance, and there are things you can do when you're alerted to a problem.
Right. Well, and you know, it is funny because it does come back around sometimes to insurance here. Is the cyber insurance though is really designed for this. So the person you would pick up, the person you would talk to, I mean, if you called an LPL, so your lawyer's malpractice insurance hotline, you might get a lawyer's answer to what's going on, which is fine. Hey, you got an ethical duty, you got to report this to so-and-so, you know, this may have to be reported to the bar association, whatever. But that's not really your issue. Your issue is, what do I do now about this hack? And so if your IT professional can't immediately, and many do, fix it or identify it, the resources that the insurance companies have deployed on this, again, is akin to like sort of the homeowner's insurance concept. Is you call them and they've got contractors for everything, right? Everything from, like you said, tree on your house or whatnot. Same thing with cyber, right? We have lists of vendors that are available 24/7 to respond. And it's such a bargain in that regard. When you know that you could have this detailed incident response plan, but if your response plan just includes calling one phone number and getting advice and then following the playbook that's been provided to you, makes whole things a whole lot easier, quite frankly. It's not just indemnity. It's not just payment of expenses. It's also the expertise in having this large array of services, everything from the forensics, which we did to ferret out wherever they went, to the actual IT person to repair the breach. There's also experts on how to get backups running. And then if you didn't have a backup, somebody that you could talk to about getting one, you know, if that's your remedy to the situation. And there's an expert for everything, PR, whether that's needed, notification, if it's notification to, and then obviously privacy breach counsel that are, I know there's some folks at Reminger and others that do this specifically to walk you through your ethical obligations and also walk you through whether or not you really need to tell anyone. Because that's the key, is you can get a lawyer's opinion that says, you know, this isn't something you need to really display to the public or to your clients. Then that's a good thing to know, that to evaluate that and have an expert that knows the answer right away.
Well, I know your firm, Kevin, offers breach advisory, breach response services. And one of the things you have on your website, we've reproduced some of the tips in our manuscript, is just what you said, have a multidisciplinary team that you may not need everybody, but you at least know who to call, ranging from a PR firm to a IT forensics person to an accountant, a data accountant. I'll also throw out another, I love ABA opinions. ABA Formal Opinion 483, it's a pretty new one. It says, when a data breach occurs involving or having a substantial likelihood of involving material client information, lawyers have a duty to notify clients of the breach and take other reasonable steps. And basically it says the duty is to assess the damage, which is sort of what, it's the same thing you said, assess the damage, notify clients if required, and then take reasonable steps to fix the problem. So that's the American Bar Association's recommendation. And then the Risk Pro again would say, this is a perfect topic for a staff meeting. Call your staff together, make it fun, you know, have lunch and talk about what, you could even have a trial run. You know, let's pretend something has happened. What do we do? Who do we call? Ghostbusters, right?
Right. Well, and at a very minimum, just raising the issue with your IT professional that has set you up or continues to maintain your systems. You could say, well, okay, the fact that I'm in the cloud, does that help me? Does it matter if I have a firewall? Do I have one? Do I have antivirus protection? What do I have? You know, just that question is pre-breach investigation, right? And planning, because at least you know what you have and what you don't. And if you say, just ask this simple question to your IT professional, what else do I need to do, in your opinion, right now to protect myself? Just that question alone. And so I can't tell you the number of people that's never had that conversation with their IT professional, right? They just assume the IT professional is doing it all and it's all going to be just fine. And you're like, well, that's technical. I don't really want to know about it. But actually just asking that question is not a technical question, because then you'll get them thinking about it. right? You're getting your own IT professional thinking about it. And also, just to Jay's point, getting your own IT professional to be thinking about, okay, let's say all that stuff you just told about me doesn't work and there's human error and somebody gets inside. IT professional, what are you going to do about it? Do I even have your cell phone? Right? Some of this stuff is so immediate and so right now that you lose a lot of sleep, you know, if you didn't have a phone number to call. So just that kind of advanced planning will help you tremendously if this does occur.
And one sort of continuing theme that's been throughout all of these 3 steps is human error. It boils down to people. Get good people in your office, stay informed, bring them on board. It doesn't do any good for you to know all this stuff if you don't share it with your office. Listen to their concerns. They may have some, they may have spotted some vulnerabilities you haven't even thought of. So bring them into the conversation. It boils down to people. In chapter 2 of our webinar, we had a company called KnowBe4 that is an expert in social engineering and email phishing, and they have free phishing email tests that you can run in your office, and you can test yourself. Is this a bogus email? Is this a scam, or is this a good one? And it turns it into a bit of a game, and you can see just how secure we are, just how knowledgeable our people are at identifying a good email from a bad email. So there are lots of ways to incorporate cyber risk management into your law practice. Kevin, would you like to move into some questions? We've got some participants asking some questions. I don't know if you can see them. I'll read some off. First, it says, do you have any suggestions about steps a lawyer can take to reduce cyber exposure when using an independent contractor, lawyer, or paralegal? Any safety steps there?
I mean, just again, the number one issue is just having a conversation with them about how do you operate, right? And do you have secure systems? Do you, at least in their own opinion, what sort of security do they have? And just having that discussion with them is really your number one thing you can do. Being knowledgeable to ask questions like, are you just working on one computer out of your house? Is that all you're doing? If that's the case, then what about your own policy about clicking on attachments? Do you get a virus scan every once in a while? Because that's what's really going to happen is somebody's working on their home computer, which is very much is like, so let's face it. I mean, I know the law practice and we use many folks like this. You have a contract lawyer, you're paying them by the hour because you don't want to hire them full time and you don't have enough work for them, but you have some and they're highly competent. So you want to use them and they're just working out of their house. Well, everyone's working out of their house now, but you know, that's all they ever have worked out of. And they're not really logged into your system. You're just forwarding them work. You do need to have a conversation with them. And I think the ethical rules will require that, that you have a conversation with you.
Sure,
you verify that they have some of these basic protections. You know, some of this stuff is free. I mean, AVG antivirus, it's absolutely free. You can do a scan of your system at any given time to make sure of it. And that they too are aware not to click on things that also double authentication, meaning if I call you or if I email you something that just seems really weird or kind of out of the norm, just please pick up the phone and call me, that kind of thing.
And your duty to supervise, it doesn't matter whether they're full-time, part-time, independent, you're on the hook if you're the lawyer, ultimately. Here we've got an incident response question. How many of our participants have a written plan? Looks like 87%. Confused by my own question. This is from the ABA Legal Tech Report. What percentage of law firms have a written incident response plan? The correct answer is 25%, according to the ABA. A quarter of law firms out there have some sort of written plan on what to do if something goes wrong. And it looks like most of our lawyers figured that out. Moving on to other questions here. Why don't insurers just include cyber as part of their professional liability? Well, I'm not qualified to answer that one.
Well, they do sometimes. But it's got to be by endorsement. Some policies with professional liability will add it as an endorsement, and those are usually the cheaper ones, and they have a little more limited coverage and maybe a smaller sublimit, right? So if you have, let's say you have $1 million legal malpractice policy, you might be able to buy a $250 endorsement that adds some cyber coverage, or a $250,000 sublimit, or a $500,000 sublimit, and sometimes that can be a much cheaper option than buying a whole separate policy or whatever. So yeah, so some of the professional liability policies do have that sort of bolt-on endorsement basis, but they're not going to just throw it in generally for free. It's really a different risk,
Right.
One that has to be, what I've been told by the carriers is it's something that has to be underwritten differently and looked at differently. And also most of them offer a whole bunch of services with it. So it's a very different type of product.
So can you, thank you, Kevin. Next question, can you provide checklists for best necessary tasks to discuss with staff, et cetera? I'll take that one. I would suggest a starting point is to go to the Alta Pro website. We've got the playbook, like I said, and it has chapters on managing your office, managing your team. If you have more specific questions, you can always shoot it to Alta Pro or shoot it to me. Send an email to the Risk Pro. How much cyber liability insurance is adequate?
Well, it depends on the size of your firm, and how much business you're doing. If let's say you do real estate closings and you have a trust account where sometimes you're holding money and you're wiring it off, I would adjust my coverage to maybe not your maximum wire, but something pretty close to it. So if it's mostly home closings or whatnot, 250,000 probably will do it, because those are, it's probably the maximum usually, but it could be $500,000 or it could be $1 million. That's just one example. Obviously, the larger that you get and the higher profile clients you get, the more coverage you would want, right? You have to look at your individual circumstances and assess, if somebody broke in here and got something, what would be my risk? And then second of all, how much money am I handling, right? Also, what would it cost me if somebody locked up my systems with ransomware? What would that cost me to get that unwound and undone, right? And we've seen ransomware requests in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, demanding, like, we'll release you the encryption code. So it's got to be at least 100,000, and it should be probably north of that, is my advice, for sure.
Okay, Kevin, we could spend another hour talking, but unfortunately, the bell is ringing here. I want to thank you so much for coming on again. And you are the man, by the way, you're the man. And now I'm going to turn it over back to Todd.
Thank you, Jay. And thanks, everybody, for listening. You just burned a perfectly good hour with us.
And earned an hour of ethics CLE credit, by the way. So it wasn't for naught. Thanks, Kevin. Listen, I got to tell you that I found the input on this webinar, or the information passed here was very valuable, and I'm not even a lawyer. Everything that Kevin was talking about in terms of working from home and all of the different risks and the increase in risks is all real, and we all know it. So before we sign off, I want to express my sincere gratitude to you, Kevin, and Jay. Great questions. Thanks for your time and the great information. And we want to also extend a special thank you to all the participants, and hope that you too found this to be a worthwhile and valuable use of your time. At the Alta Pro Risk Purchasing Group, we're striving to deliver as much high quality value add services as we can. Hopefully that this is a good example of that. And if you're an Alta Pro insured, we want to thank you for your continued business. Okay, so with that, let me just make sure that you guys fill out the survey that you're going to get. What's going to pop up at the end of the webinar. Here are the codes, Alta and Pro. Contact information for Kevin and Jay are here. Feel free to reach out to either one of them if you have any questions. And we want to wish you an advanced happy weekend. That's it.
Thank you.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you, guys. Bye. Thanks, Kevin.